And then while you grab your seat, let me just say welcome to FCC. I'm so glad to have you here today. My name is Jimmy. I'm one of the pastors. And if it's your first time here at FCC, I want you to know right off the bat, we're a church that believes Jesus is for you. We are for you. You are welcome here. We've been praying for you. We've been expecting you. We're so glad whatever it is that got you out of bed and here today, that happened. And here's the deal. I want you to know I haven't just been praying for you, but very specifically, I've been praying that God will say something to you that you need to hear, that only He can say. And so that's my hope today. That's my prayer today for you as we start a new series that Brian mentioned a little bit ago. We spent the last few weeks looking at the story of a guy named Elijah, and we're going to turn a page now and move into something new. And we're going to spend a few weeks talking about what it looks like to follow Jesus into the unknown, which is what Elijah did. He followed Jesus very boldly into the unknown, but now we're going to talk about what it looks like for you and me to do that in our lives. So if you have a Bible, open up to Matthew chapter 14. We're going to look at a passage in there that's a pretty well-known story, but we're just going to kind of take a deep dive on it today in Matthew chapter 14. And if you don't have a Bible with you, that's okay. We'll put this stuff on the screen, but I'd love for you to track with me in whatever you have, okay? Now, before I get into this, let me quickly recap something for you that you need to know for the next 3 weeks. Over the last year or so, we've done a lot of communicating about our mission and our vision as a church. In other words, why we're here, what we're about, and what it's going to mean for us in the future. So as we've talked about our mission, which, just to put this back out there for you, if you've ever wondered why we're here and why we do what we do, you could boil it down to this. We exist here in Canton to reach out with unconditional love to all people and lead them to be all-in disciples of Jesus. Not just to reach out, but we do that with an unapologetic agenda that we want to see people meet Jesus. And we want to see Him work in their life. And we want to see Him heal things. And we want to see Him transform things. And ultimately, we want to see people discover a few things, which brings us to our vision. And our vision comes from a verse in Matthew chapter 4. You don't need to turn there. I'll put it on the screen for you. But we're going to leave this verse on the screen for a minute because I'm going to explain what this means. This is Matthew chapter 4, verse 19. These are Jesus' words. He just says, "Come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." It's a pretty simple verse, but here's how that breaks down into our vision, okay? As we talk about what it means to be all-in disciples, what it means to be people who are all in with Jesus, you could take that verse and you could break it down into 3 pieces. The first one is Jesus' invitation to come and follow Him. So we say an all-in disciple knows and follows Jesus. And if we are going to be all in with Jesus, not just casual observers, not just in the distance or on the fringes or sitting on the bench, but if we're going to get in the game and follow Jesus, it starts with knowing and following Him. And so that's the first part, all right? But then Jesus goes on from there in this verse. Can we get this verse on the screen? Matthew 4:19. There it is. Okay. So He goes on from there. He doesn't just say, "Come and follow me," but He says, "I will make you." And that would allude to this idea that there's some transformation that happens the more you follow Jesus and the longer you know Him. He changes stuff. And so we say an all-in disciple doesn't just know and follow Jesus, but they're changed. They're transformed by Jesus. But He didn't even stop there. He didn't just say, "Hey, come with me, I'm going to change some things." He very specifically said, "Come follow me and I will make you fishers of men," which is a weird thing to say, but let me explain. He was talking in this verse to some men who were out on a boat fishing. They were pros. This is how they made a living. And He said, "Guys, I want you to leave your nets behind because I have something for you to do that will blow your mind. You're going to love it, but you got to leave your nets behind and come and follow me, and I'm going to teach you how to fish for people." And if you're scratching your head like, "I don't know what that means, that's weird," so were they. They didn't understand either. Fish for people? Really? What Jesus was saying was, "I'm going to teach you how to do what I do." And it's important that you know that because we're going to come back to it in a minute. But I say that because not only does an all-in disciple know and follow Jesus, not only is an all-in disciple being changed by Jesus, but an all-in disciple commits to Jesus' mission. And that's what we want to do as a church. We want to help people become all-in disciples of Jesus, not just casual observers, not just fans, but people who say, "Jesus, I am all in for you. I will go where you want me to go. I will do what you want me to do. I will reach who you want me to reach. You have every part of me. I'm all in." That's what I want to be. That's what I want you to be. That's what I want our church to be. All-in disciples of Jesus. And as we do that, guys, here's what will happen. See, I've said this so many times lately, but I'm going to say it again. A church should not be a place that you go. It's not a program that you attend. It's not a building or a physical location. The church, when we get it right, is a movement of people who are doing what Jesus has called us to do. It's a movement of people who are changing our community, and we're doing it just so that people will look at the community and they'll say, man, our city's kind of looking a little bit better. And I think it's because the church is being the church, and as we do that and as we get it right, people are going to say, that's what I want to be a part of. I don't just need somewhere to go on Sunday to feel better. I want to be a part of something that's making a difference in the world. That's what the church should be when we get it right. We want to be a movement of people who are changing the world in Jesus' name so his kingdom grows and he gets the glory. And the way we say that is, it's kingdom over castles. We don't care about building our castle. It's not just about growing our church. It's about building his kingdom so people meet Jesus and they find hope in their lives, because, man, we need that in our world. Amen? Don't we need that? That's what we're here for. And so our vision is to help people find hope and experience community and live with purpose. And here's how all this comes together. I believe that as people know and follow Jesus, they find hope. Maybe real hope for the very first time. Like maybe in your life you feel like you find hope at some point, but then it turns out to be shallow or an imitation. And man, you bump into Jesus and you learn what real hope looks like. And we want people to find that hope. I believe that as people get into community, not just sitting in a room like this, going to church, so to speak, but as you get into a small group or as you get people around you who are going to point you to Jesus in your life, as you experience that community, that's when Jesus starts to transform your heart and he changes you from the inside out to look less like you and more like him. And as you change, you experience a whole new, better way of living that you never knew before. And it happens in community. It happens in circles, not rows. So you need to get into a community, right? And that's where transformation happens. That's the second part of that verse. And then the third thing is we want people to live with purpose. Well, how do you do that? I believe you do that as you commit to the mission of Jesus, as you say, I'll do what you want me to do. Not what I want to do, not what I have dreamed up, but Jesus, you come first. That's what we want to help people do. And I say that, I go through all that with you guys for a reason, because today we're going to start talking about what it looks like to take some pretty scary steps in our lives and in our faith and following Jesus. We're going to talk about what it looks like to step out of our comfort zones, to step out of what we know, to do things that people around us might think are crazy, or you might even think it's crazy, but you're saying, Jesus, if it's what you're asking me to do, I've at least got to consider the question, right? And that's exactly what's happening in the story that we're going to look at in Matthew chapter 14, one of my favorite stories in the Bible. Let me give you a little background, okay? Just before what we're going to read, here's what happens. Jesus is teaching on a hillside. This crowd of people gathers. There's at least 5,000, but typically they only counted heads of household. So more likely 8 or 10 or 12 or 15,000 people gathered on this hillside. They're listening to Jesus talk all day. They're out in the sun. They're getting, hot and tired and hungry. And the disciples say, Jesus, we got to feed them before there's a riot. So Jesus says, go find some food in the crowd. And only one kid, somehow out of 15,000 people, one kid brought lunch. And so they take his lunch, and, Jesus does what only Jesus can do. And I've tried to picture how it works. All I can picture is they put it in a basket, and he keeps reaching in there. And there's more bread and more fish and more bread and more fish. And sooner or later, the whole crowd has been fed. And then Jesus sends these 12 followers of his, these 12 apostles, these 12 disciples, and he says, go out in the crowd, just gather up the leftovers. And so they grab some baskets, and they're just going through the rows, picking up all the leftover food. And it says at the end of that, there were 12 basketfuls left over. And I think that number is very significant for a reason we're going to get to in a little bit. But 12 basketfuls of food left over. This is a crazy thing for the disciples to get to witness and be a part of. They get to spectate as Jesus does something absolutely miraculous, something only he could do. Well, at the end of the day, Jesus says, I'm worn out. We got to break this party up. It's time to go. So he tells his disciples, you guys get in the boat. You go across the sea. I'll meet up with you later. I'm going to send the crowd home. And so his disciples go and get in a boat, and they set out across the Sea of Galilee, which is this massive lake in the middle of Israel, several miles across, and they're going to sail from where they are on one shore to the other shore, right? And so he sends them off. Jesus sends the crowd home. And then here's what happens starting in verse 22 of Matthew 14. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Let me translate that for you. It's the middle of the night. It's the third watch, so it's somewhere between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., and the disciples are on this boat in the middle of the sea when a storm kicks up. Now, the Sea of Galilee is notorious for storms. It's notorious for shipwrecks. And even though these guys are professional fishermen, they're freaking out because this could be the end. They are miles from shore. It is pitch black, and Jesus is not there to bail them out this time. And so they start to worry, they start to fear, they start to freak out. And this storm is just increasing in intensity, and they're fighting against it. They're sailing from west to east, so they're sailing into the wind, and they're just fighting this storm. But all night long, they're making no progress. Here they are just in the middle of the sea, and they're wearing out, and they're fighting against the storm, okay? So verse 25 says, shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. Just stop right there and don't miss, okay? So this is another miracle. Jesus goes out walking across the water. When he said, I'll catch up with you later, he had a weird way of, making that happen, right? He's walking across the water. And verse 26 says, when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. It's like a scene from Pirates of the Caribbean. They're on a ship in the middle of the storm, and here comes this person walking across the water. And so just put yourself in their shoes, because, yeah, they're characters in the Bible, and sometimes we just hype these characters up to think, oh, they were just crazy, people of faith, right? No, these are just fishermen. And they're on a boat in the middle of the sea, and somebody's walking across the water. What would you do? After you peed your pants, then you'd think it was a ghost too, because people don't walk on water, right? So they say it's a ghost, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Verse 28 says, Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Peter's thinking, there's no way this is him. I'm going to call his bluff. Jesus, if it's really you, tell me to get out of the boat. And Jesus, I have to think, smiles for a second and says, okay, I'm going to call your bluff. He says, come on. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, when he remembered the storm, when the waves were crashing up over his head and pushing him around and the wind's blowing him around, right? He takes his eyes off of Jesus. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. And then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. Now, this story is not about a storm. And it's not about Jesus walking on water. Even though you might think it is, that is not the point of the story. It's not even about Peter walking on water. This is a story about faith, and more specifically, it's a story about Peter and how he responded to this call of Jesus to get out of the boat. That's the point of the story. Now, to fully understand and appreciate this, okay, you need to know this is not the first time Jesus has called Peter out of a boat. See that verse in Matthew chapter 4 that I read a few minutes ago? Peter was one of the guys in the boat that Jesus was talking to, and he said, come and follow me, and I'll teach you to fish for people. I'll make you fishers of men. Now, for Peter, this meant leaving his way of life behind. It meant leaving his occupation behind. It meant leaving how he provided for his family behind to go and follow this guy who he knew very little about. He only knew one thing. He knew this Jesus, this guy who was inviting him out of his boat, was a rabbi. He was a teacher. He was kind of gaining popularity. His movement was gaining momentum. He was kind of building a reputation for himself. But Peter has a choice to make. Do I stay in the boat where I'm relatively comfortable and I put food on the table and this is what I do, it's who I am, or do I go? And Peter chose to get out of the boat and chose to leave everything behind. And to me, that seems a little crazy. To you, that might seem a little crazy to think I would leave my whole way of living behind to go follow a stranger. But let me tell you why this was a big deal. See, Peter, growing up as a young Jewish boy, would have had one dream, like every other Jewish boy growing up had the same dream, and that was to be a rabbi, to be a teacher, to be a religious leader. And so their whole educational system is built around this. They're literally it's built to teach these young Jewish boys how to be religious leaders. And so they study it their whole childhood, and they reach this point in their teenage years where kind of it's like a tipping point, like the rubber meets the road, where the rabbis line all these boys up who've been going through all this schooling and all this teaching and all this education. They just have them stand in a line, and then the rabbis all get together and they say, I think that one has potential, but that one not so much, and he fell asleep in class, and that one remembers everything, and right? And they just kind of pick and choose. These are the ones we think have what it takes, and these are the ones that don't. And once they have that conversation, then the rabbis approach the ones who have what it takes, and they say, come and follow me. And for that little boy, it's like, I made it. I'm on to the big leagues, right? And they get to go and they get to learn from these rabbis and be mentored and trained to be the next generation of leaders. But for the other boys, it is like their dream and their family's dream and their hopes. It's like all dashed on the rocks. And the leaders say to them, go back and learn your family business. So if your dad makes tents, you learn to make tents. If your dad's a doctor, you learn to be a doctor. If your dad's a fisherman, you become a fisherman, which is where we find Peter, right? So what that tells us about him is, at some point, some rabbi looked him in the eyes and said, hey, you don't have what it takes. But then one day, he's in the boat, and along comes Jesus, and he says, come and follow me. And Peter freezes because he dreamt of those words his entire life. And this is his moment. And he's got a choice to make. Am I going to get out of this boat, or am I going to stay in the boat? And for him, even though it might seem crazy to you and it might seem crazy to me, to Peter, it's a no-brainer. Go. You just go. Like, this is the dream. This is why, this is everything he hoped for. You just go. But now you fast forward a few years, and here's Peter in a boat in a storm in the middle of the lake, and here's Jesus, probably, maybe a ghost, probably Jesus saying, hey, Peter, I need you to get out of that boat again and trust me again and follow me again and do something crazy again. And so this time, Peter's got a lot more to process, because he's not just a little ways from shore fishing on a sunny afternoon. Now it's the middle of the night, and he's on a stormy lake in the middle of nowhere, and if he steps out of this boat and that's not Jesus, he's dead. It's the end. Very little chance he is rescued at that point. So it's a big step. And he's got to make a big decision really quickly. And so Peter does what I don't know if I would have had the courage to do. He steps out of the boat into the waves, and he begins to walk on water with Jesus. This is crazy. Sometimes I think we read these stories so many times, or we hear these stories so many times, we forget about how absolutely crazy this is. But could you imagine if you, it's summer and your family's hanging out by the pool, and you go to dive in and you just land on the water, and that's Peter. Peter's like, I'm standing on this water right now. This is crazy. Do not miss the miracle in this. But then here's what happens. As Peter's like, oh my gosh, this is so cool, and he starts taking steps, and then a wave hits him in the face, and then the wind blows over here, and then there's some thunder and some lightning, and all of a sudden he begins to realize, oh no, I'm out of the boat, right? And he takes his eyes off of Jesus, and he sinks. Just splash right in the water. And he cries out to Jesus for help, and Jesus reaches down and grabs him, and I picture Peter neck deep in stormy seawater, and Jesus, just with a smile on his face, goes, man, you have such little faith. And I have to think Peter in that moment is like, are you kidding me? Those guys are still in the boat. I'm the one with no faith. I'm out here in the sea. I'm about to drown because you told me to get out of the boat. You think this is funny? Jesus is like, you have such little faith. Guys, I've wondered so many times why Jesus would say that, because who would have faith in that moment? But can I remind you what happened yesterday? Because Peter was in the crowd when Jesus fed 15,000 people with a couple fish and a few loaves of bread. It's like one kid brought a Lunchable to the party, and Jesus was like, okay, I got everybody. And they watched it. They watched Jesus do things only Jesus could do. And that's why Jesus looks at Peter and he says, man, you have little faith. Have you already forgotten? Here's what Peter forgot. See, the best part of that story about Jesus feeding the crowd was not the fact that he fed the crowd. It's the fact that when the disciples went through the crowd and picked up the leftovers, there were how many basketfuls left? There were 12. And there were how many disciples in the boat on the sea that night? There were 12. So check this math out, okay? That meant there's a basket full of food for each passenger on the boat to give them the strength and the nourishment to battle the storm all night long until Jesus showed up. And the moral of the story of Jesus feeding the crowd was this. It was simply, I am more than enough. Let me ask you a question. Has Jesus ever asked you to do something crazy? Has Jesus ever asked you to do anything that you think to yourself, man, people are going to think I've lost it? Or even you're like, Jesus, this cannot be you because this is insane. Maybe like Peter, Jesus told you to leave your job behind. I have a friend years ago who was very successful in the business world. He was earning well into 7 figures. And it went through this season of his life where he was just learning who Jesus was and what he wanted him to do. And he just woke up one day and he felt like Jesus was telling him, I want you to leave that behind. I have a different purpose for you. And so he quit his job and he went to work at a church, helping them with their accounting and their finance and their, all the businessy details of what they do. And everybody in his life thought he was absolutely nuts. He left millions of dollars, a successful career in the corporate world on the table to go into ministry. Everybody thought he was crazy. I thought he was crazy. He's never looked back. I can't imagine that was easy. I can't imagine his wife was a very big fan of that plan. Maybe, I don't know. But he just said, I felt like it's where Jesus wanted me to go. How could I say no to that? Maybe Jesus is asking you to do something like that. Maybe Jesus is asking you, there's a relationship in your life that's not a healthy relationship, a friendship with somebody who is constantly dragging you down or pushing you away from Jesus or distracting you. They are like the storm and the waves and the wind. It's like every time you get your eyes on Jesus, you got this voice in your head that's just taking your eyes off of him, right? And so Jesus is saying, you need to carve that relationship out of your life. It is toxic. It's not healthy. You got to get rid of it. But you don't want to do that because you've been friends forever. You love that person. You have this hope for a future. And so you're fighting against that. But Jesus is just saying, no, they have to go. And it seems crazy to you. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's like a secret sin that you have in your life that you just hang on to because it's the thing that gives you comfort. It's the thing that makes you feel better. When you're stressed, it's the thing that you go to. It's like your one thing that you hold on to that just gives you a little bit of relief or a little bit of satisfaction on a hard day. And you know Jesus wants you to release that thing because it's sinful. It's not healthy. It's destructive in your life. And he's calling you to let go of it. But you're like, Jesus, this is crazy. It's the only thing I have that gives me a little bit of relief. I need what's in that bottle. Or I need what's in that syringe. Or I need what's in that bag. Or I need what's on that computer. Or I need what's over here, what's over there. I need that thing. And Jesus, you're asking me to give this up. It seems crazy. I don't know if I can do it. Maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's literally your life. Maybe Jesus is asking you to trust him for the first time. You have never taken that step. You're like, I have to go to church every Sunday if I start following Jesus? What? I might have to volunteer. You got your excuses, right? You're battling against it. You're pushing back. Jesus, I don't want to commit to that. That seems crazy. What will my friends think? What will my family think? And so you got excuses and you're pushing back and you're dodging it. You're avoiding it, right? And what Jesus would say to you is this. Whatever your boat is, whatever the thing is that gives you comfort and security in your life apart from Jesus himself, if he is calling you to step away from that thing, then he would have you know that he is not just enough, he is more than enough for you. See, Jesus, when he shows up out on this lake, and the disciples are like, I think it's a ghost, and they're freaking out. And Jesus says, no, it's I. Actually, if you translate that to English more accurately, it translates, I am. That comes from this old name for Jesus, Yahweh. Sometimes we'll sing that in a song. Maybe you've heard that before. But this name for God, Yahweh, from the Old Testament translates to I am, and it means a couple things. It means I am, but actually it also means I will be. And so what Jesus is already saying to Peter, before he tells him to get out of the boat, before anything else happens, what he's saying is, hey, Peter, I am enough for you while you're in that boat, but I will be enough for you when you step out of it. When you take that step into the water and you don't know what's going to happen and your life is on the line, I've got you then too. And Jesus would say to you today, whatever step he is asking you to take, when you take that step, you can trust him that he's been where you are, and he is where you are, and he already is where he's asking you to go, and he's got you. And he's not going to let you sink. And you can trust him because he is not just enough. He is more than enough. And he will give you the strength to do what Peter did, and that is to take a step and become a water walker, to walk on water with Jesus. A few things about that. If you're going to be a water walker, the first thing we know about water walkers is this. They recognize the presence of God when it's there. The disciples, at first they weren't too sure, and then Jesus identified himself, and that gave Peter the courage to even issue a challenge, right? They recognized, they began to realize this is actually Jesus. In Mark's version of this story, he actually uses these words that Jesus comes out and it says he was about to pass by the disciples, which might sound funny. I don't know how you picture that, but I always thought that was like, they're in this boat battling the waves, and Jesus is like, hey guys, and he runs by on the other, the way to the other side of the lake. It doesn't actually mean that. You remember in Elijah's story when he gets to the mountain and he goes into this cave to spend the night, and the next morning God shows up and he says, Elijah, I want you to go out and stand on the mountain because I'm about to pass by. Elijah, I'm going to encounter you. I'm going to be there with you, even right now in the middle of your hardest moment. And what Mark means when he says Jesus was about to pass by them was as the disciples are fighting for their lives in this storm, in this boat, Jesus was about to encounter them. And if you're going to be a water walker, you need to know that when you get out into the storm, Jesus will encounter you there. He will be there. And I don't want you to miss his presence because it's easy to do when you're distracted by the wind and the waves and everything going on around you. It can be easy to miss. But Jesus is going to be there. So if you're going to be a water walker, learn to recognize his presence. Watch for how he shows up in your life. Watch for how he's working. Listen for what he's saying to you and know that he's there. Another thing water walkers do is they discern faith from foolishness. See, Peter, he had to figure out pretty quickly, is this Jesus or did I have Taco Bell too late last night? I'm getting a weird feeling now, right? Because he's going to put his life on the line. And you need to do the same thing. It's responsible. If you feel God prompting you to do something that feels a little crazy, you've got to figure out pretty quickly, God, is this you? Or am I just having a crazy thought or a crazy feeling, or I'm being impulsive, or it's a midlife thing or whatever. You got to figure that out. But I promise you guys this, okay? If you ever have doubts or fears or hesitations or reservations about what he is calling you to do, you can tell him that. And he's big enough to take it. He's big enough to handle your doubt. He's big enough to handle your fear. In Scripture, when we see people express to Jesus that they had doubts or fears, he didn't tell them to get lost. You have little faith, and he lets Peter's hand go. It's like Jack from Titanic. He just drifts into the water, right? He didn't do that. Well, what would make you think that if you have a little bit of fear, a little bit of doubt, that you can't say to Jesus, I'm scared? Is it you? How can I be sure? As water walkers, we got to kind of figure this out. Is this faith or is this foolishness? And I want you to know this, okay, that courage is not enough. And that's important because if you're waiting to have the courage to take the step that Jesus wants you to take, maybe you won't ever fully feel that. And that should not be the thing that keeps you from taking the step. Courage is not ever really enough. It also takes wisdom, and it takes discernment. And it takes some good people around you in your life who will keep you focused on Jesus and push you toward taking the steps you need to take. That's part of the wisdom piece. You got to discern faith from foolishness. Another thing about water walkers is they accept fear as the price of growth. Sometimes the fear never goes away, guys. Had Peter stayed in the boat, maybe the fear wouldn't have gone away. And if he was waiting for the fear to stop, maybe it never would have happened. So he had to do this. He just had to say, okay, if I have to face this fear so that my faith can grow, then that's the step I'm going to take. And you might have to do that in your life too, because the fear may never go away. I don't know if you've ever had a moment in your life where you realize, oh no, what did I get myself into? But Peter, that's what happens to him in the story, because he says, all right, Jesus, if it's really you, tell me to get out of the boat. And Jesus says, okay, come on. And Peter's like, I spoke too soon. What did I get myself into, right? And now, again, he's got to make this decision. Will I face the fear or not? But the truth is, if you want your faith to grow, you will have to face a certain degree of fear in your life. The thing to keep in mind in those moments is if you have recognized the presence of Jesus, then you're not alone in the moments when you're afraid. He's with you. And then you got to do this. You got to wait on the Lord. Water walkers do that. They wait on the Lord. Here's what that means. Peter could have said, all right, Jesus, I'll get out of the boat, but I'm just going to give the storm a minute to die down. Right? You ever been inside like Walmart, you're grocery shopping, and you go to walk to your car and you look outside and it's just a torrent. And so you think, I'm just going to stand here in the doorway for a minute and wait for the rain to die down a little bit. Peter could have done that. I'm going to wait, Jesus. I'm going to give the waves a minute. I'm going to see if they die down. I've also always wondered why Jesus didn't just make the storm stop before he asked Peter to get out of the boat. I've always thought, man, that would have made it so much easier, right? At least if the sea was calm, he's stepping onto calm waters. Maybe that helps a little bit. And he's thinking, okay, if I sink, they can pull me out. Why wouldn't Jesus have stopped the storm before he asked him to take a step? You ever felt that way? Like, Jesus, you're asking me to do something crazy, and I have all these storms in my life, and if things would just calm down a little bit, maybe I could think, or maybe I could rationalize or process what you're asking me to do, but I can't get there because my marriage sucks. Or I can't get there because this addiction has such a grip on me. Or I can't get there because my friends won't stop doing what they're doing and just distracting me, and I'm just sucked into it, and if you would just help me with that. Or I can't get there because financially I'm just trying to figure out how to put food on the table, and if that would just work out, Jesus, if you would just answer my prayers and just make this storm calm down a little bit, then maybe I could do what you're asking me to do, but I can't even process it because everything's a mess. And I got all these storms, and I got all this chaos in my life, and I just can't think rationally. I can't think clearly. If you would just calm the storms down like I've been asking you to do, then maybe we could talk. It never works that way. And what water walkers do is they learn to wait on the Lord and to trust this, that if I step out of this boat into a storm, he's got me. And you know what happens, guys, is when we do that, then what we see is Jesus show up in such an incredible way that only he could show up. Then it's not about who's still in the boat that can rescue you if you start to sink. It's just you and Jesus, and you find out even in a storm, he's got you. And that's great because then when the water does calm down, your faith is that much stronger, but he grows you in a way that can only happen by trusting him in a storm. So let me just encourage you that if he is calling you to take a step and you're in the boat and you're struggling with that and you're fighting that and you're afraid of it and you're making excuses and you're afraid to move, that if you will just take that step, he will show up in a way that it'll just grow your trust in a way that couldn't happen any other way. But the only way you can figure that out is to take the step out of your boat. Which brings me to this. Water walkers, get out of the boat. They get out of the boat. That's what Peter had to do. As he's making this decision, he had to choose. Do I say no, and I stay in the boat, where I have like a relative sense of safety? It's a little more comfortable in here. I like it in here. My friends are in here. It's pretty stormy out there. But then he misses out. For the rest of his life, he has to wrestle with, like, I had a chance to do something so cool, and I passed it up. Can I be honest with you and tell you, I think I've said no to Jesus so many more times in my life than I've had the courage to say yes. And I can look back and I can see things that I think now, if I'd have just said yes to it, how cool it could have been. But I was scared, or I didn't have the faith, or I just didn't see enough, and I'm a control freak, and I didn't know enough, and I just didn't trust him. And Peter could have made that choice. Or he could say yes. And yeah, he's putting his life on the line, and there's no guarantees. But man, if this is Jesus, and if this works, could you imagine the story, the icebreaker he has for every party he goes to for the rest of his life? Hey, guess what I did on the sea last weekend? I walked with Jesus. You ever done that? No? Okay, I have. It was cool. I mean, this is This is a story no one else in history can tell. But here's what it requires. It requires that first step. Every adventure with Jesus starts with a single step. Everyone. So I'll ask you again, what step is Jesus asking you to take? Let me give you two specific challenges. Number one, if you're somebody who's been following Jesus for a while, I want you to think about this. Who is your one? You'll hear us say this sometimes. Maybe you've been by the giant wall out here that says all for the one in the lobby. Here's what it's about. If you follow Jesus, there is someone in your life that God has put there specifically for you to reach. Not for somebody else. For you. So who is that person? A family member, spouse, neighbor, coworker, somebody at your kid's soccer field, somebody at the gym? Who's the person that God has put in your life specifically for you to reach them? I want you to do this. I want you to name the person. I want you to think of them. Somebody's probably coming to mind of a person in your life who doesn't have the hope of Jesus yet. And they haven't experienced community, and they haven't learned to live with purpose, and you have, and it's time for you to share that with them. Somebody is there, okay? It's a promise. Jesus would not have asked you to fulfill a mission and then not set it up for you. So think about who that person is and name them, and this week I want you to start praying. And then here's what you've got. You've got 3 weeks from today to Easter Sunday. 3 weeks to get the courage up, right? Easter is the easiest invite you get all year long. So few people will say no to trying church on Easter. It'll blow your mind. You might think they will, but they're so likely. If you just say, hey, I'm going to go to church on Easter, I'd love for you to sit with me. You want to come? It'll blow your mind how many people will say yes. You got 3 weeks. Just ask them. And let me encourage you, you are not responsible for their answer. You're just responsible to ask the question. So who is it? Who's your one? And next week, we're going to talk about how to start investing in that relationship so that they will see Jesus in your life. And he can do the heavy lifting. He just wants to work through you to do it. Maybe that's the step you need to take this week, is just a simple invite. Or ask somebody to coffee and share what Jesus is doing in your life. That might sound freaky to you, a little bit like stepping out of a boat into some stormy water in the middle of the night. It's just coffee. Maybe that's your step. Or maybe it's this. Maybe for the very first time, you need to take the step of trusting Jesus with your life. Maybe you've been coming for weeks and weeks and weeks, and every week you see people getting in that water. You hear people confessing their belief in Jesus. You hear people asking them, just like Peter did when he's sinking in the water, Jesus, save me. And you hear people asking Jesus to save them, and we get so excited about that because it's literally why we're here. It's what we're here to do, is help people meet Jesus. And you see it, and you're like, man, that's so cool for them. But you're fighting it because you don't want to let go, and you don't want to give up, and you don't want to surrender, and you are a control freak like me, and you want to hang on to that, and so you're fighting it. And even though you sense Jesus saying, trust me, come and follow me, you say, no, Jesus, that's crazy. My family would think I've lost it. I can't take that step. I don't know enough. I'm not ready. I got some problems I got to figure out. I got a mess in my life. And here's what Jesus would say to you. I'll clean that up. You don't worry about it. Just follow me. So maybe your step today is, for the very first time, you need to say, Jesus, okay, I'm all in. I don't know it all. I don't feel ready, but I believe you're who you say you are, and I believe that you love me, and I believe that you died for me, and I believe that you're alive today, and I believe you have a plan for my life. And let me tell you guys, that's all you need to know. All you need to know at that point is enough to say, Jesus, I'm just ready for you to, you just lead me the rest of the way, right? So here's what you're going to do today. In a minute, we're going to sing a song, and I'm going to stand right there by those rocks. And while we're singing, it's time for you to stop making excuses. It's time for you to stop running from Jesus and try to figure it out on your own. And a guy come up to me after 9 o'clock, and he said, I've just got this bitterness in my heart, and I don't know how to deal with it, and it's hurting in his life. And I just prayed with him. He didn't get baptized. He just wanted to pray. Because he realized doing it on his own is not working. And maybe you're realizing that doing it on your own is not working. And your step today is to let Jesus come alongside you and encounter you and lead you in your life. And he'll teach you to trust him as you follow him. And so I just want you to meet me right there talk with you. I'll pray with you. If today's your day to follow Jesus, man, we'll get in the water together and you get baptized. You could walk out these doors so different than you walked in here. You'll have hope you didn't have coming in here. We had 3 people come up at the end of the service at 9 o'clock and say, you know what? I've been on the fence. Today's my day. Let's do this right now. We got clothes backstage. We got hair dryers and towels, and your makeup's fine. Go to Taco Bell. They don't care what you look like. Come on, man. What's your excuse? Why are you staying in your boat? Jesus has an adventure for you. He's got a whole life for you that you have not experienced yet. And maybe he's saying to you, today's the day you step into it for the very first time. And just come talk to me during the service. We could do that right now on the spot. I don't know what it is, but here's what I want you to do. I just want you to ask, what's the step Jesus is asking me to take? And I want you to start asking yourself, what's stopping me? Name it. You can't defeat what you don't define. Name it. And then pray for Jesus to give you the courage to overcome that thing. And what you will see is, just like he showed the disciples, he is more than enough. And he proved it to us on the cross. He proved it to us when he died so that we could experience grace and forgiveness. He proved it to us when he came back from the dead, and he's alive today, and he loves you, and he's working in you, and he's working in the world around you, and he will prove over and over and over he is more than enough for you. So we're going to take communion together. If you have the elements, go ahead and grab them right now. And this is a time in our service every Sunday where we just pause, and in stillness, we just say, Jesus, thank you for that grace that's enough and that's more than enough and that is with me and will be with me. We remember his sacrifice. We remember that he's alive again. And let me just tell you, this is where you remember that if a God can take a rugged cross and turn it into an empty tomb in 3 days, he can take what's broken in your life and he can make it good. And he can heal it. And he wants to do that today. Jesus, thank you so much for your word, and thank you for the promises we see in it, that you're with us and that you will not let us sink. God, you rescue. It's who you are. It's what you do. So for anybody who's here or watching online, who's just praying for the courage to take a step, God, I pray that your spirit would give them the courage. And if that step today is following you for the very first time, God, get them out of their seat. Move them this morning to come and to make that decision and to say, I'm going to stop living and trying to do this on my own and hitting wall after wall after wall and just the frustration of trying to figure it out and it never works. God, would today be the day that they let you start to lead and they just follow? And give them the courage to take that first step. Thank you for Jesus and for the cross. Thank you for the hope we have in you. We pray this in your name.